Today we are going to hike in Pagat to visit the cave, lattice stones and coastline, to see zonation on the exposed side of the island, various grades of limestone forest and the water lens. The walk is 5 kilometers there and back, and we descend 550 feet and climb back up. On this 3D graphic by John Hodgson, elevation is indicated by the different colors. You can see that there are 2 steep escarpments that we go down, but it starts out flat. As we start into the trail, we're going into an area that's been fairly heavily disturbed. Probably been ranches at different times, so what we're seeing along the edge is a lot of tangan growing back here. There is some pago, lots of ferns. This is what the ecologists would call scrubland. Scrub forest is a disturbed yet diverse forest, rather open, and the trees often small. Here we see the short trees and an open area of ferns. When primary forest is cut down for agriculture or other purposes but then abandoned, a natural process of succession takes place. This process would eventually lead back over decades or centuries to re-establishment of the primary forest. But when the disturbance is recent or continual, we see scrub forest. Its species composition varies from place to place depending on the particular history. Among the continuing disturbances are invasive species, damage by feral pigs, and typhoons. We started down the slope here now, so we're out of what was just flat ranch land. We're getting into an area where it looks like there's a lot more native trees. There's fago and pago. First glimpse of the ocean. We're going to be down to sea level by the time we're done. There's a butterfly. Butterflies are herbivores. We tend to think only of the adult stage in the life cycle, but they spend most of their lives as caterpillars eating leaves. The adults drink nectar for energy, but exist really only to mate and find the right host plant to lay the eggs. This is the reverse of most marine animal life cycles, where it is the larvae that disperse. As we reach the secondary forest, the first thing we see is an invasive vine, false rattan, all over the trees. And the tips of its leaves are able to curl around the trees and shrubs it grows over. Secondary limestone forest occurs on the first escarpment and across the middle terrace. As we start down the first steep slope, the height of the trees increases. Secondary limestone forest has many of the species that are in primary forest, but there are more non-native species. One native species that occurs in both is paipai, which has been thought of as an endemic genus Guamia, with one species Marianae, but it has been shown to be identical to Myogene cylindrocarpa from Australia, and that is the older name and takes precedence. Its young leaves are orangey pink and soft, becoming the typical green as they mature, and eventually being colonized by lichens and mosses. The midrib is in the middle of the leaf, and there are no small leaves at the base, in contrast to gulos, which also produces pink leaves, but in a set of 4 leaflets, with the midribs of the larger pair off-centered toward each other, and a pair of small leaves. This is Cynometra.
Cynometra ramiflora.
And this one's got these kind of, this off-center midrib, hasn't it, like the ephit?
Yes.
But ephit doesn't do these pink leaves on it. You can see that we're getting into a lot of lemon decina here. Here's the lemon decina. And this is the Pajogum halantano. There are a lot of bird's nest ferns here. These things. And you can see the limestone substrate in the background with the big roots coming down over it, looking for groundwater. And we're looking at a part of the root system of a banyan tree where it's wrapped around the old tree, the nurse tree that it started on somewhere way up there. You see how the roots all come together and then the branches go and spread out. Well, lots of epiphytes. It's a pretty humid environment in here, so there's mosses and liverworts on the tree. The ground here is mostly limestone rocks and tree roots. We're fairly deep into the limestone forest now. There's lemon-de-china stems over on the left, just went out of view. And we're looking through here to a whole lot of limestone, karst limestone in the background. And a big tangling old banyan tree here that goes right over the path. And just below here there's a very steep climb down. Here, somebody very kindly tied some ropes that we can use to go down. I can see down the bottom there's another rope. Best approached going backwards and holding on to the rope where you can. We're coming along now through the ancient village. And just up ahead is one of the Lusong grinding stones. Right here. This is made out of volcanic rock, which doesn't occur locally. They must have brought this here from the south somewhere. The stone that's sitting on there for a grinding stone is perhaps what they would have used, or it may just be another rock that was lying around. But this piece of volcanic rock, which is a couple of feet across this way, there's a big hole that's been pecked out of it. And so in some places, like up at the Tikjan, there are places in the rock where they pecked out a number of little holes for mixing various herbs and spices. Here's another one. In here is the remains of a latte house. A set of latte stones. Here's the line of latte stones. I can actually walk into this. That might be a grindstone. This is probably one of the capstones. You can see the capstones, of course, all on the ground. Another small latte set here. We're almost to the edge of the forest as the trail will go out into the coastal zonation here shortly. We are about to leave the limestone forest and into the strand forest, where we will see the contrast between this, the windward side of the island, and the leeward side on the trail to Lost Pond. For the sake of making the comparisons clearer, and because we have not yet scheduled the field trips, I'm going to patch in video from Lost Pond here and vice versa. There are 3 trees to know about. First is the half flower, which is readily identified from the half flowers, and the white berries that are used in traditional medicine to treat pink eye. Along with this, on the west side of the island, is the octopus bush, but it does not tolerate salt spray and cannot grow on the windward side. Finally, there is pemphis, a woody plant that grows right out on bare limestone near the water's edge. This is pemphis. Rhymes with Memphis, but it starts with a P. And I want to show you this because on this side of the island it grows pretty tall. I'm only 3 feet tall, but this must be at least 10 feet tall. And it's got these little white flowers in the leaves. We'll take a close-up in a minute, and then when we go to Pagat Cave, we're going to show you how it grows like bonsai on that side in all of the wind. Here is Pemphis on the very exposed rocky terrace above the sea, with the wind blowing gently today and not so full of salt spray as usual, growing like bonsai. You can also see it on the limestone outcrops along the ocean front in Arahan.
Just want to show you, it is the same plant that we saw 12 feet tall on the other side of the island.
The view now swings around from the shoreline to look straight back at the zonation, with the limestone forest in the background, Pemphis on the outer edge, and the middle filled with a very wide zone of half-flower, which we will now walk through. On the leeward side, the zone of half-flower and octopus bush is very narrow. We're going to walk through this half-flower zone, just so you can get an idea of how wide it is, in contrast to that tiny zone that we saw at Lost Pond. We're walking along here, it's still solid half-flower, solid scaevola. All the way out, even beyond this. We'll see if we can go around this rock. Yeah. There's the coastline, and on the edge there you can see the Pemphis. What we're looking at here used to be a cave, and in one of the big typhoons about 30 years ago, I think it was Typhoon Yuri, which didn't have a whole lot of winds but had massive storm surge. It literally blew the top of this off. You can perhaps see that the rock in the middle here is more yellowy, not so weathered as the grey on the side. You can see on the side of this blowhole how high up the rocks are wet. Some mighty splash going on there some of the times. It's relatively calm today. The coastline here consists of cut benches. The limestone from the ancient coral reefs is now being eroded away here on the northeast coast, where the island juts out into the prevailing trade winds. In this ancient limestone we can see where soil was occasionally deposited into the reef and fossilized along with it. This soil is now hard rock. Looking down from this terrace, we can see the waves constantly at work, and yet the rocks are thickly covered with seaweed, and there are also many small animals attached to the rock or seaweed, or hidden in crevices out of the reach of the hydrodynamic forces in the waves. The visit to the cave gives us an experience of the water lens that lies below northern Guam, our aquifer. Limestone is porous, and all the water that would run over the surface in the southern volcanic hills percolates down through the limestone in the north. We climb down into a sinkhole, and then further down a passage into the cave, which has 2 chambers. Seawater also permeates sideways into the rock, and fresh water floats on salt water, so that the rainwater ends up floating on the salt water in a lens-shaped mass, rising and falling with the tide. Most of the water is in tiny cracks and crevices. Think of the rock as being like a sponge. There is no lake down here, but there are a few caves with open water in them like this. To get into the second cave, we have to slide through a slanted tunnel, where we are soon waist deep in the cold water. And then we come up into the main cave. There are few creatures living down here, at least that are big enough to see, but there are a few shrimp and even some blind fish in Guam caves, perhaps those not so disturbed as this frequently visited tourist spot. There's also a diverse community of microbes, bacteria and protozoa lining the cracks and crevices throughout the rock because the water brings nutrients down with it as it percolates through. There are probably many microbes in this pool of water too, so even though it is part of our water supply, best not to drink it untreated. After we have cooled off sufficiently, it's time to head back up the long hill with a last look at the primary limestone forest outside the cave.